The basics of government. Every country has a system to make rules and keep things organized. In a democracy, the people have the power. They use an election to choose a candidate they like. This person usually belongs to a political party with specific ideas. The person who wins becomes a representative for the people. Their job is to go to the parliament or capital to help pass a law. If the people don't like the current government, they can vote for someone else next time. This is the core of politics, deciding who has the power and how they use it to lead the state. The rules and the leaders. Every country has a constitution, which is a special book of rules that even the leaders must follow. This document protects the rights of every citizen. In some countries, the top leader is the president, while in others it is the prime minister. Before someone is elected, they must start a campaign to travel around and meet people. They often take part in a debate to argue their ideas against others. The group that wins is the government. But the group that loses is also important. They are called the opposition. Their job is to watch the government closely. The government creates a policy, a plan of action to solve problems, using the authority given to them by the people, making changes. When a government wants to create a new law, they first write a bill. This is like a draft or a suggestion. If the leaders agree on it, it might lead to a reform, which is a big change meant to make things better. To pay for these changes, the government sets a budget, a plan for money, and collects a tax from the people. Sometimes, people are unhappy with a crisis, like a money problem or a health problem. To show they are unhappy, they might start a protest in the streets. This is allowed because of freedom of speech, which is the right to say what you think. Leaders also have to talk to other countries to keep peace. We call this diplomacy. Everyone's ideas are shaped by their ideology, which is their personal set of beliefs about the world. If an old rule is no longer good, they make an amendment to fix it. The three branches of power. To keep a country fair, many systems use the separation of powers. This means the government is split into three parts. First is the legislature, which is the group that writes and debates laws. Second is the executive, the part that carries out those laws, like the president or prime minister. Third is the judiciary, which includes the court system where judges decide if laws have been broken. If a leader tries to take all the power for themselves, they might be called a dictator. To prevent this, systems have checks and balances, rules that allow one branch to stop another from doing something wrong. Sometimes a big decision is too important for just the leaders, so they hold a referendum, where every citizen votes yes or no on one specific issue. If a high-level official commits a crime, they may face impeachment. All these rules are there to maintain legitimacy, meaning the people believe the government has the right to rule. Behind the scenes, the bureaucracy, government workers, handles the daily paperwork to keep the administration running. The world stage. No country lives alone. Every state has an ambassador, a person who represents their country in another land. They live in an embassy, which is like a small piece of their home country in a foreign city. When two countries have a problem, they might sign a treaty, which is a formal, written agreement to keep the peace or to trade. Sometimes many countries join together to form an alliance, promising to help each other if there is trouble. However, if a country does something wrong, other nations might use sanctions. This means they stop trading with that country to punish it. Many of these big decisions happen at an international organization, like the United Nations. Within a country, the government must also care about human rights, which are the basic protections every person should have, regardless of where they live. To help people understand their views, politicians often use propaganda, information that is biased or misleading to promote their agenda, their list of goals. If a country wants to be completely independent and make its own rules, it protects its sovereignty. Different ways to rule. In our first lesson, we learned about democracy. But there are many other systems. A monarchy is a system where a king or queen is the head of the state. If the king has all the power, it is an absolute monarchy. But if they follow a constitution, it is a constitutional monarchy. Some countries are a republic, where the head of state is a president, not a king. If a country is run by a small, powerful group of wealthy people, it is called an oligarchy. In a theocracy, the government is based on religious laws. If the government has total control over every part of public and private life, we call it totalitarianism. Regardless of the system, a country usually has a capital, which is the city where the government sits. Inside the government, officials must avoid corruption, using power for personal gain. To keep the trust of the electorate, the people who are allowed to vote. The political spectrum. In politics, people have different ideas about how much the government should do. This is often shown on a spectrum, a scale. People on the left wing usually want the government to provide more services like healthcare. People on the right wing usually want smaller government and more individual freedom. Someone who wants things to stay the same or change very slowly is a conservative. Someone who is open to new ideas and more government involvement is a liberal. If a person is in the middle, they are a moderate. A radical, however, wants to change the whole system completely and immediately. These ideas form a person's partisan view, meaning they strongly support one side. When two different sides work together, we call it bipartisan. To spread these ideas, a politician might use a slogan, a short, catchy phrase to win over public opinion, the race for power. Before an election, there is a primary, which is a mini-election to decide who will represent a party. Once the main candidates are chosen, they go to the polls, the places where people go to cast their votes. During the election, people use a ballot, which is the official piece of paper or electronic screen where you mark your choice. If you cannot go to the polls in person, you might use an absentee ballot to vote by mail. After the voting ends, there is a count to see who won. In some systems, the person with the most votes wins. This is called a plurality. If the results are very close, a candidate might ask for a recount. Once the winner is official, the old leader begins the transition of power to the new leader. If a leader has to leave early, the country might hold a snap election to choose someone new quickly. The goal of every candidate is to win a mandate, which is the authority given to them by the people's votes. The power of the people. When you are a legal resident of a country, you have certain responsibilities. One of the most important is to be an active citizen. In many countries, you can join an interest group or a lobby, which is a group of people who try to convince the government to change a specific law. Inside the government, if a group of people disagrees with a new bill, they might try to veto it. A veto is a no vote that stops a law from passing. Sometimes politicians will use a filibuster, which is a very long speech intended to delay a vote as long as possible. If the government wants to know what everyone thinks about a new idea, they might hold a consultation. However, if someone breaks the law, they might be granted amnesty, a formal pardon by the leader. All of these actions happen within the jurisdiction of the state, which is the legal area where their power applies. To keep things fair, there must be transparency, meaning the government is open and honest about what it is doing. The layers of government. Most countries are not just run from one office. They have a federal system or a central system where power is shared between the big government and local regions. The people who work in these offices are part of the civil service. These are not politicians. They are professional workers who keep the country running. When a government wants to work with another country, they might form a coalition. This is a temporary group of different parties or nations working together for a common goal. To keep the peace, they use negotiation, which is a formal discussion to reach an agreement. If they agree, they might create a protocol, which is a set of official rules for how to behave in international situations. Sometimes, a country will grant asylum to someone who is in danger in their home country. Inside the state, the government must manage the infrastructure, roads, bridges, power, using the revenue, money they collect. If a leader makes a big mistake, they might lose their seat in parliament. Finally, everyone must respect the rule of law, which means no one is above the laws of the land. Conflict and stability. Politics isn't always peaceful. Sometimes there is a conflict between different groups or countries. If a group tries to take over the government by force, it is called a coup or coup d'état. To prevent this, a state needs stability, which means the government is steady and not likely to fall. A government might use its military to protect its borders or enter a war. However, most modern leaders prefer to use soft power, which is the ability to influence others through culture and values rather than force. If a leader has too much power and ignores the law, they might be called an autocrat. On the other hand, if the people have no leader at all and there is total chaos, that is called anarchy. To keep order, the government exercises governance, which is the way they manage the country's affairs. If a country is under the control of another country, they may fight for liberation to become free. Finally, a government must respect humanitarian needs, ensuring people have food and safety during hard times. Politics in daily life. Governments are responsible for the welfare of their people, meaning their health and happiness. To help people afford things like bread or electricity, a government might provide a subsidy to keep prices low. One of the biggest challenges any leader faces is reducing poverty and growing the economy. Sometimes, the government provides a financial stimulus to jumpstart business activity. They also look at demographics, data about the population, like age and income, to plan for the future. If there is a dispute between two groups, the government may act as a mediator to find a solution. Leaders must also protect natural resources, like water and oil, while caring for the environment. To remain fair, officials must avoid nepotism, giving jobs to family members, and fight against discrimination to ensure everyone is treated equally. The power of the message. Politicians spend a lot of time on their rhetoric, which is the art of using language effectively to persuade people. Before a big decision, a leader might hold a press conference to answer questions from journalists. If they want to test an idea without making it official, they might leak a trial balloon to see the public's reaction. To make sure their message sounds good, they use a spin doctor, a person whose job is to present information in the most positive way. During an election, you might see a negative ad where one candidate attacks another. If a politician says something they regret, they might claim they were quoted out of context. To reach more people, they use grassroots movements, which start with normal people in local communities rather than leaders in the capital. If the government tries to stop the media from reporting the truth, that is called censorship. In a healthy society, there should be pluralism, where many different ideas and voices are allowed to exist at once. To measure what people are thinking, experts conduct an opinion poll. Borders and belonging. Every country has a territory, which is the land and water that it officially controls. To enter another country, you often need a visa, which is an official permit. If a person feels a very strong love and pride for their country, they are showing nationalism. While pride can be good, it can sometimes lead to a border dispute, where two countries disagree on where one ends and the other begins. Inside a country, the population might be very diverse. An ethnic group is a group of people who share the same culture or heritage. A smaller group within a country is called a minority. If people from different countries move to a new land, it is called immigration. To become a full member of a new country, an immigrant goes through naturalization. Sometimes a country will use patriotism to encourage people to serve their nation. If a country decides to go its own way and not involve itself in world problems, it follows a policy of isolationism. How the world trades. Every country has an economic system to manage its resources. In capitalism, businesses are owned by private people, and the market decides the prices. In socialism, the government plays a larger role in owning industries to ensure fairness. When a country sells goods to another country, it is an export, and when it buys goods from abroad, it is an import. To protect their own businesses, a government might put a tariff, a tax, on imported goods. If a country is very successful, it might have a surplus, extra money, but if it spends too much, it has a deficit, debt. To grow, countries often sign a free trade agreement to remove taxes between them. However, if prices go up too fast and money loses its value, we call this inflation. If the economy stops growing and people lose jobs, the country enters a recession. To prevent this, the government tries to maintain prosperity for all citizens. The machinery of government. The top leaders of a country usually meet in a small group called the cabinet. These are the most important ministers who advise the leader to make sure everyone follows the rules. The government often appoints an ombudsman, an official who investigates complaints from citizens. When the government wants to study a specific problem deeply, they form a committee. If a politician wants to influence a decision, they might join a caucus, which is a meeting of supporters or members of a specific political party. Sometimes a leader will issue an executive order, which is a rule that has the force of law but doesn't need to go through Parliament. Within the government, there is often a hierarchy, a system where people are ranked one above the other according to authority. To keep secrets safe, some information is marked as classified. If a leader wants to change their team, they perform a reshuffle, moving ministers to different jobs. Every official must avoid a conflict of interest, where their personal life might interfere with their professional duties. Finally, the government must respect its jurisdiction, the official power to make legal decisions in a certain area. The power of action. In a free society, people often join a movement to fight for a cause they believe in. If they want to change a specific law, they might start a petition, which is a document signed by many people to show the government what they want. They might also organize a boycott, where they refuse to buy a product or use a service to protest against a company or country. Sometimes people feel so strongly that they engage in civil disobedience, which means peacefully breaking a law to show it is unfair. To gain support, activists use advocacy to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. If they want to change the government quickly, they might call for a revolution. To spread their message, they rely on mobilization, which is the act of organizing a large group of people for action. This is often done through social media, which has become a powerful tool for modern politics. If a group is trying to separate from a country to be independent, they are part of a secession movement. Above all, activists fight for justice, ensuring that the law is fair for everyone. Protecting the nation. A country's foreign policy is its strategy for dealing with other nations. To protect its people, a government might build a strong defense system. If two countries are worried about each other, they might enter an arms race, where they both try to build more weapons. To prevent a war from starting, countries often use deterrence, showing they are strong, so that no one wants to attack them. Sometimes a country will choose to be neutral, meaning they do not take sides in a conflict. If a person or group uses violence to scare people for political reasons, it is called terrorism. To stop this, governments use intelligence, which is secret information gathered about enemies. If a situation becomes very dangerous, a leader might declare a state of emergency, giving the government extra powers for a short time. When a war finally ends, the two sides may sign an armistice to stop the fighting. To keep things stable, countries try to maintain a balance of power so that no single nation becomes too strong. Global justice. The world has agreed on certain universal rules to protect every human being. One of the most important concepts is human rights, which are the basic freedoms everyone should have, such as the right to life and liberty. If a government treats its own people very cruelly, they might be accused of crimes against humanity. To handle these serious issues, there is an international court where leaders can be put on trial. If a group of people is targeted for destruction because of their race or religion, it is called genocide, the most serious crime in politics. To help people in danger, international groups provide humanitarian aid, like food and medicine. People fleeing war or persecution are called refugees, and they often seek asylum in safer countries. To ensure everyone is treated fairly, we use the term equality. If someone is held in prison without a fair reason, it is a violation of due process. Finally, countries often work together to promote globalization, which is the process of the world becoming more connected through trade and culture. Politics close to home. While a president runs a country, a mayor is the leader of a city or town. They work with a city council, which is a group of people elected to make local laws called ordinances. These leaders manage a specific district or area. To pay for local services like firemen and parks, the city collects a property tax. One of the biggest jobs of local government is zoning, which is deciding which parts of the city are for houses and which are for factories. If the city grows too fast without a plan, it leads to urban sprawl. To improve the community, the government might start an urban renewal project to fix old buildings. Residents can participate in a town hall meeting to speak directly to their leaders. If the local government needs more money for a big project like a new bridge, they might ask the citizens to vote on a bond. All these efforts help maintain the public works that keep a city running every day. Politics and the planet. Governments around the world are working to create a sustainable future. This means living in a way that doesn't use up all the Earth's resources. One of the main goals is to reduce the carbon footprint of factories and cars. To do this, many countries have signed a climate pact, an agreement to lower the gases that cause global warming. Some governments use a carbon tax to punish companies that pollute too much. At the same time, they give money to companies that create renewable energy, like wind and solar power. This move toward a cleaner world is often called a green transition. If a company pretends to be environmentally friendly just for good PR, they are accused of greenwashing. To protect nature, leaders establish a nature reserve where building is not allowed. All of these rules are part of a country's environmental policy. Ultimately, the goal is to achieve conservation, which is the protection of plants, animals, and natural areas. The national wallet. A government's main source of money is taxation. This money is used to pay for public services. If the government spends more than it earns in a single year, it has a deficit. When these deficits add up over many years, they become the national debt. To fix a big debt, a government might choose a policy of austerity, which means cutting spending on things like schools or hospitals. This is often unpopular with the public. On the other hand, a government might face bankruptcy if it cannot pay back its loans. To keep the economy stable, the central bank manages the money supply. If a country's money loses value compared to other countries, we call it devaluation. Sometimes, the government will provide a bailout to save a large company or bank from failing, because its failure would hurt the whole country. All of these decisions affect the standard of living for everyday people. If the government handles money well, the country achieves fiscal stability. The battle of ideas. Throughout history, people have followed different ideologies. Some believe in communism, where the government owns everything and shares it equally. Others prefer liberalism, which emphasizes individual freedom and free markets. In a secular state, the government and religion are kept separate. On the opposite side, populism is a type of politics that claims to represent the ordinary people against the elite. If a leader wants the country to return to traditional ways, they are following traditionalism. Some believe in utilitarianism, the idea that laws should be made to bring the greatest happiness to the most people. If a country is run by people chosen for their skills and talent, it is a meritocracy. However, if a government is very strict and demands complete obedience to authority, it is authoritarian. Finally, egalitarianism is the belief that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. Resolving tension. When two groups in a country or two different nations have a major disagreement, they are in a deadlock. This means neither side wants to move or change their mind. To break this, they might agree to a compromise, where both sides give up a little bit of what they want to reach an agreement. Sometimes a third party is brought in to offer arbitration, which is a legal way of settling a dispute without going to a full court. If the tension is very high, leaders might use de-escalation tactics to calm things down and prevent a war. However, if one country is very aggressive, another might use a policy of appeasement, giving the bully what they want to keep the peace, though this is often seen as a mistake in history. When a conflict finally ends, there is usually a reconciliation process to help people forgive each other and live together again. To make sure the agreement lasts, the parties might sign a Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, which is a formal but non-binding document. If someone is being forced to do something against their will, we call it coercion. To stay safe, countries often seek a consensus, which is a general agreement among all. The path of law. When a law is already in place, it is called a statute. However, laws are not always perfect. If someone believes a law is unfair, they may file a lawsuit to have a judge look at it. During this process, they must provide evidence to prove their point. The highest court in many countries is the Supreme Court. Their decisions are final and set a precedent, which means all future similar cases must follow the same rule. If a leader wants to stop someone from being punished, they can issue a pardon which clears the person's record. In a courtroom, the prosecutor is the person trying to prove someone did something wrong, while the defense tries to protect them. If the law is broken by the government itself, it is a constitutional crisis. To ensure fairness, every person is entitled to legal counsel, a lawyer. Finally, if a law is no longer needed, the government can repeal it, which means it is officially cancelled. Accountability and power. For a government to work well, officials must have integrity, which means being honest and having strong moral principles. However, sometimes people in power commit misconduct, which is improper or illegal behavior. One common form of this is bribery, where someone gives money to an official to get a favor. If a politician tells a lie under oath in court, it is called perjury. If they use their position to steal public money, it is embezzlement. To find out the truth, the government or a special committee might launch an inquiry. During this time, they might subpoena a person, which is a legal order forcing them to come and testify or provide documents. If the misconduct is very bad, it can lead to a scandal that destroys a person's career. To prevent these problems, many countries have a watchdog, an independent group that watches the government to make sure they follow the rules. This is all part of accountability, the idea that leaders must explain their actions to the people. The math of power. Before an election, the government must decide how to divide the country into areas called a constituency. Each area sends a representative to the parliament. Sometimes, politicians try to draw the borders of these areas in a sneaky way to help their own party win. This is called gerrymandering. During an election, the person currently holding the job is called the incumbent. They often have an advantage because people already know them. If a leader wins by a huge number of votes, it is called a landslide. However, most leaders have a term limit, meaning they can only stay in power for a certain number of years. If a leader has lost an election but is still in office until the new person takes over, they are called a lame duck because they have very little power left. When it comes to voting on a law, a certain number of members must be present to make it official. This is called a quorum. If a member is present but doesn't want to say yes or no, they choose to abstain. All of this ensures that proportional representation is maintained so the government actually reflects the people's wishes. The language of nations. When a leader travels to another country for an official visit, it is called a summit. During this time, they must follow strict protocol, which is a set of rules for how to behave and who should sit where. To keep things friendly, countries aim for rapprochement, which is a rebuilding of good relations after a period of tension. If a foreign official does something very wrong, the host country might declare them persona non grata, which is a Latin phrase meaning they are no longer welcome and must leave. To speak for the country, a leader might use an envoy, a special messenger sent for a specific task. If they reach a verbal agreement but haven't signed the final papers yet, they have an accord. To stay safe, some diplomats are given diplomatic immunity, which means they cannot be arrested by the local police for most crimes. All these efforts are part of bilateral, two countries, or multilateral, many countries talks. Finally, if a country wants to remain friendly with everyone without choosing sides, they follow a policy of non-alignment. The movement of power. In politics, things can change very quickly. When a country is in a state of upheaval, everything is confused and disordered. To fix this, a leader might try to build a mandate, which is the authority to carry out a specific plan, because they won the election by a lot. However, if a government is not careful, it can face a backlash, a strong and fast reaction against a decision by the public. To keep people happy, politicians sometimes use patronage, which is giving jobs or favors to people who support them. This can sometimes lead to clientelism, a system where people only vote for a leader in exchange for personal gifts or money. If a law is passed but then ignored, it is called non-compliance. To make sure laws are actually followed, the state must have enforcement. Sometimes a small group will try to break away from the main party. This is called a faction. If these factions can't agree, the government might become polarized, meaning people are divided into two very different and angry groups. To fix this, a leader must find a common ground. The final word. When a leader finishes their term, people look at their legacy, the things they will be remembered for. If they made positive changes, they might leave behind a prosperous nation. If they were involved in malpractice, however, their reputation might be ruined. Sometimes a political event has a spillover effect, meaning it causes changes in other countries or different parts of society. Over time, these events can lead to a paradigm shift, which is a fundamental change in how everyone thinks about a problem. If the government is strong and reliable, it provides continuity, allowing the country to grow steadily. When a new generation takes over, there is a succession, hopefully leading to a consensus on how to move forward. The goal of all politics is to create a civil society where every citizen can thrive. This 30-day journey has given you the proficiency, skill, to understand this complex world.